The slippery slope of social media censorship is getting slipperier and slipperier. So here's what Vice News says about this. Crowdfunding site Patreon is purging far-right figures. So let me walk you through this because there's a lot of information here. And to be fair to Patreon, it's not just Patreon. It's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's the rest of them. There has been a purge, and it's not just of far-right figures. When you look at all these different social media sites, it is a variety of different ideologies that have effectively been purged. So in the case of Patreon, here's what we know. So the Proud Boys, which was Gavin McInnes's group, they had their page pulled down. Milo Yiannopoulos, who everybody knows who he is, he's the provocateur on the right, and he had put up a page, I believe in one day it got pulled down. Now, when they were asked, hey, why was Milo pulled down? He's only up there a day. Like, what did he do in that time frame for you to say, I'm going to pull it down? They said, well, he was associated with the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys are a violent extremist group, therefore, that's why we're going to pull him down. Now, Milo, he was associated with them, but he disavowed them, actually. And but he was still pulled down for that anyway. So listen, now I want to be clear. I'm in no way, shape, or form defending any of these individuals in terms of their ideology and their beliefs. And I think that there are totally fair criticisms of most of these people that I'm going to lay out for you in this segment. But we do need to make a distinction, which is, so what exactly are the rules? Because if the ultimate point is, all right, listen, we just don't like them because they're insane, because of their insane politics, is that really a standard that we want to set? Like, oh, we don't like you because of your politics and we're going to pull you down? Because I got news for you. That's going to backfire on every single one of us. So, again, let me walk you through it. In the case of the Proud Boys, listen, it is true. I've seen the videos of the Proud Boys that have concerned the fuck out of me. Now, they swear up and down, you know, Gavin McInnes swears it, and fucking Anthony Cumia was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he swears up and down, like, no, it started as a joke, and it's not serious, and blah, 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 blah. I've seen the videos of the Proud Boys, and I do think it's an inescapable conclusion that Gavin McInnes has literally advocated for direct violence.
Kill you. That's the Proud Boys in a nutshell. We will kill you. We look nice. We seem soft. We have boys in our name. But like Bill the Butcher and the Bowery Boys, we will assassinate you. Now, part of the reason I agree to do the talk is because I'm allowed to bring all my guys. And we can fight our way in and fight our way out. I think it's our job to do it. And the cop just turn a blind eye.
Wow, you came a long way.
You're wearing a MAGA hat, and some guy with a slightly punk demeanor comes up to you and says, hey, are you Sal or are you pro-Trump? Choke him. Trust your instincts. Don't listen to what he has to say. Choke him. Fighting solves everything. We need more violence from the Trump people. Trump supporters. Choke a mother... Choke a bitch. Choke a tranny. Get your fingers around the windpipe. I want violence. I want punching in the face. I'm disappointed in Trump supporters for not punching enough. Get a gun. Get ready to blow someone's head off. And Malsberg goes, you're not advocating violence, are you? And I go, I absolutely am. It's a wonderful, effective thing.
Now, I'm a free speech absolutist, but direct threats of violence are one thing that doesn't even pass the free speech absolutist test. In other words, nobody of sane mind is going to say, yeah, you're allowed to directly advocate for specific violence and get away with it. So on that front, listen, I'm not, you have to judge each one of these on a case-by-case basis, and in my opinion, some of the deplatformings are way more reasonable than other ones. So that's the one that they give for the Proud Boys. For Milo, it's a little sketchy because they're saying, hey, listen, it's because he was associated with the Proud Boys. Now, the Patreon CEO had said, you're only going to get pulled down from Patreon if you violate basically our terms of service, but it's on Patreon. So in other words, they're not going to dig into your past and go to something you said on YouTube in 2008 or something that was in a video that was then posted on Twitter by somebody else at this time. So by their own original standard, it seems to me that even though I despise Milo Yiannopoulos with every fiber of my being, I mean, the dude, they're saying it's because you were associated with the Proud Boys, even though you disavowed them, that's why we're going to pull you down. So that strikes me as sketchy. Now, the next one is Lauren Southern they pulled down. Now, Lauren Southern is a far-right commentator, and the thing that they pointed to her is that she did fundraising for a group called, I think, Defend Europe, and that group was partaking in literally, I think, turning away refugee ships or something like that, like basically trying to run interference to stop the saving of refugees. And so they basically said, hey, listen, Lauren Southern, you're raising money and you're involved in criminal activity, so that's how can we know that that money that you're raising is not going towards criminal activity, so we're not going to let you fundraise on our site. That was the Lauren Southern one. And then it got to, you ready for this one? There was a group called It's Going Down, Antifa group, and I don't know exactly what the charges were against them, but they pulled them down. And I think it was similar to the Lauren Southern situation, how their argument is, you're using the money that you're raising to plan for literal violence, so we're not going to let you do that. And then it went from Antifa to Sargon of Akkad. Now, listen, Sargon is a guy, back in the day, I did 3 or 4 streams with Sargon, and him and I would debate different topics and talk about them. And since the election of Trump, I do think it's fair to say he's taken a rightward turn. And in fact, he said on an interview with the Progressive Voice that he considers himself a supporter of Trump. I find that absolutely inconceivable, and it's weird to see. And he also did, my last straw with him was when he did what I consider a smear video against Ocasio-Cortez, totally strawmanning her beliefs, basically saying she's a democratic socialist in the traditional definition of the word, which is comical. She's a milquetoast social democrat, so this idea that she's legit post-capitalist is utter nonsense. And I considered it a smear video. He gaslighted us by saying he supports Justice Democrats, and then we get a Justice Democrat elected. He immediately turns on her and does, basically rah-rah for the right wing in this country. I get so fed up with the notion of somebody living in a country that has universal health care, and is gaslighting us when we're working so hard and fighting to try to get stuff like universal health care in this country, and he runs interference against our politicians who are fighting on those fronts. That drove me nuts. And so, I have no interest in further dialogue because he basically turned around and smeared the group that I worked hard to build up. And I know what we stand for, and he's claiming that we stand for something I know we don't stand for. So I had enough on that shit. Now, having said that, they pulled him down, and here, get their reasoning here. Listen to this. He had been doing, and honestly, this was brave of him. And I don't know, it took balls to do this, but he made a point of, all right, I'm going to go around and debate a bunch of basically alt-right guys. Like, I'm going to make a point of trying to explain to them why they're wrong. Okay, that's fascinating. So he does that, and then in the course of one of those debates, he says to one of these white supremacist dudes, literal, like open alt-right kind of guys, like, listen, according to your guys' own logic and your own ideology, you're acting like a pack of N-words. Now, he doesn't say N-words. He says the actual word. So what happened was an organized campaign from those guys on the far right where they basically bombarded, I guess, all of his the social media companies that he was a part of, that he had an account on, one of them being Patreon, and they heard that clip out of context where Sargon says the N-word. Now, to Patreon, they either don't know or they don't care that he used that word in the context of saying to literal white supremacists, hey, you guys are a bunch of idiots, and according to your own ideology, you're acting like a bunch of N-words. They didn't care about the context, or they don't know the context, and so they pulled down his thing. Now, again, the head of Patreon himself says, oh, if you do something bad or wrong or mean, but you do it on another platform, well, then that doesn't count. We're not going to pull you down because it's not on our platform. and we don't want to discriminate based on ideology or anything like that, so we lean very much towards the side of free speech. Well, he didn't say it on the Patreon platform. He didn't even say it on his own channel. He said it on some other channel when he's standing up to alt-right, literal alt-right people. And you could say, listen, it's a fair point to say, I think under no circumstance he should say that word. Okay, fair enough. But don't pretend like he used it. Don't get rid of the context from the conversation, because then that's just disingenuous. That's just disingenuous at that point. And listen, this is the slippery slope that we're talking about. So don't get me wrong. Some of the people that they pulled down, if their arguments were, hey man, listen, you're doing direct threats of violence and that's unacceptable. Even as a free speech absolutist, I say that's like one of 3 or 4 things where I agree that should not be allowed. But then when you get into micromanaging and policing what people may or may not have said on other outlets, and then you get into looking at things out of context, I mean, listen, don't tell me that this isn't driven for political purposes, because it is. So I hope that Patreon reverses this, because it really, and again, from a guy who just told you how fed up I am with Sargon of Akkad. But this is not legitimate. This is not just, and Patreon should reverse this decision immediately. And again, I want to be clear. I just told you. I am immensely fed up with Sargon of Akkad and his pro-Trump nonsense and what I view as his turn to the right. He might swear up and down that he's not turning to the right. If you flat out support Trump as he said he did, you did turn to the right. There's no question about that in my mind. If you're smearing Justice Democrats as he did, you did turn to the right. There's no question about that. But having said all that, that's all irrelevant, because that's not reason enough to post down somebody's page. But this is what we're seeing. Now, finally, I want to make this point. If I haven't convinced you yet on this front, just understand something, guys. On Facebook, what did we learn recently? And I spoke about this the last time I was on Rogan's podcast. They pulled down about 800 pages with the most bullshit rationale I've ever heard. Like, oh yeah, their accounts are they're using other accounts while they're using that account, and it's whatever. Who cares? Shut the fuck up. Yes, we're pulling them down because we don't like their politics. So it was 800 pages that they pulled down, up to 800 pages. Let me give you some of the names: Nation in Distress, Reverb Press, Reasonable People Unite, The Resistance, Right Wing News, Snowflakes, Free Thought Project, The Anti-Media, which focuses on being anti-war and anti-establishment, Police the Police, Filming Cops, did I say Nation in Distress, and more. So many pages that the connecting tissue between all of them is dissenting and anti-establishment. Now, it's anti-establishment on both ends of the spectrum, and you could say, hey, many of these pages are far right. Yeah, true, fair enough. But many of them are also considered far left. And once you accept the logic of, yeah, let these corporations in smoke-filled back rooms determine who to pull down and who not to pull down based on their politics, well, that of course violates the principle of freedom of speech, and of course takes away this awesome openness that we've had to this point on the internet. Now, again, don't get me wrong. If you're talking about instances of provable libel or slander or doxing, or most importantly, direct threats of violence, and listen, I'll be fair. In the case of Patreon, even if they say some of those people were using the funds to literally commit crimes, and we're not going to accept that. Okay, fair enough. I hear you. But every single instance on Twitter, on Facebook, on Patreon, where it really does come down to, we just don't like him. Yeah, we don't like the ideology. We don't like that he said that word. We don't like, forget the context, forget everything else around it. We just don't like him, so we're going to pull him down. That is a horrendous precedent to set. And again, if I still haven't convinced you about this, what happens when they pull down my Patreon account? What then? Certainly possible they do it. That's our funding for this show. That's how you guys fund this show. When we had Adpocalypse hit and we set up the Patreon account, that was the lifeline for this show. That's what it is. Listen, it's honestly one of the best sites I've ever been involved with. I mean, they really, I can't heap enough praise on it for you guys listen to the show. If you like what you hear, you pay me $2 a month or $5 a month, or if you want to go all out, $7 a month on Patreon. And I love all of you for it. And it makes us crowd-funded, and it's awesome. It's like really grassroots, and I love the concept behind it. But we can't go down this path because there's no end to going down this path. They can use a bullshit rationale to take away the funding for any of the political figures that you like. You're telling me they can't dig up something Cenk Uygur said, 6-7 years ago? Of course you can. You're telling me you can't take out-of-context videos of me and show them to somebody at Patreon and they'll panic and then they'll say, oh, pull down Kyle's thing too? Of course you can. This is a show right here that you guys listen to where I regularly talk about U.S. foreign policy. I regularly talk about how oftentimes we're the aggressors. We're going on the offense. I regularly talk about how when you look at the textbook definition of terrorism and it says offensive violence for a political or religious reason, and then you look at some of the actions we've taken around the world, oftentimes we are the terrorists. You're telling me that, and even if it's not the case right now, because whatever, the ideological makeup of the people at Patreon might happen to mesh more with me, you're telling me that it's not conceivable that at some point the person who is the head of Patreon leans right and then they see things I've said and they go, okay, we're done with him? Of course it's possible. So to me, this is unacceptable, and this is a further example of censorship on the rise on the internet. But I don't think this is acceptable. And I do find it kind of insanely smug and insufferable when I see people who are on the left who are celebrating him getting his account taken away. It's hard for me to fathom that some people don't realize that this can instantly be turned on. I already told you, if you're Antifa, they had their account on Patreon pulled down. On Twitter, countless examples of people, oh, you're a Russian bot, they pull it down. Again, Facebook, same thing. Oh, you're the anti-media, you're against war, you're against the establishment, you're against corruption. So it's always going to be used eventually, censorship, on marginalized people, on people not towing the line, not saying the standard status quo bullshit arguments. So I would hope that we could all stand in solidarity on this one and understand that, because it was literally the case on this front. It was an organized alt-right onslaught that led to them deciding to pull down his page. So, I mean, listen, if you're against him getting it back, by definition, puts you in league with the alt-right on this one. So I'm just saying that's a reality of the situation. So even though I have massive disagreements with the guy and he's pissed me off so many times, it's fair is fair, right is right, and he shouldn't have gotten it taken away. And I hope Patreon reverses this decision ASAP.